The first time I heard the music, I didn't know it was music. It was late autumn, the kind where evenings arrive early and quietly, like they're trying not to disturb anyone. The woods behind my house had already started to thin, leaves drying into pale golds and soft browns, branches showing more bone than skin. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a mug I hadn't finished, when the sound drifted in through the open window. At first, I thought it was the wind, not the sharp wind that howls or rattles, but the gentle kind that moves slowly, brushing against things rather than pushing them. A long, wavering tone, soft, almost careful. I paused, hands still in the water. The sound came again. This time, it lingered. Not random, not chaotic. There was a rhythm to it. I leaned closer to the window. The woods stretched just beyond my backyard fence. Old trees, tightly packed, their trunks dark and tall, like they were listening to one another. The sound was coming from there, deep inside. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. That was what unsettled me later, how easily it blended into the evening, like it had always been part of the world, and I was the one who had just started paying attention. It reminded me of a melody you half remember, something familiar but unreachable, a tune you might hum without knowing where you learned it. I told myself it was probably someone hiking with a speaker or a distant radio carried strangely by the air. Sound does odd things in the woods, after all. Still, I closed the window, not because I was afraid, because I felt distracted. That night, as I lay in bed, the music returned, fainter now, softer, as if it knew I was listening. It slipped through the walls, through the quiet hum of the house, and settled somewhere just behind my thoughts. Not keeping me awake, no. It did something stranger. It made sleep feel deeper, heavier. As I drifted off, one thought surfaced, slow and unhurried. Why did it sound like it was waiting? The first time I heard the music clearly, it was just after midnight. Not the kind of midnight that feels dramatic, the quiet kind. The kind where the world has already decided to sleep without you. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a mug I hadn't finished. Outside the window, the woods were nothing but layered shadows. Tall trees overlapping like silhouettes cut from black paper. No wind, no insects. Even the crickets had gone silent. And then, faintly, music. At first, I thought it was imagination, the brain's habit of inventing patterns when it's tired. A low, slow melody drifting in and out like breath against glass. It didn't have a clear instrument, no sharp notes, no rhythm I could count. Just sound. It wasn't loud enough to be intrusive. It wasn't soft enough to ignore. It felt misplaced, like hearing a lullaby in an empty hospital corridor. I turned off the faucet. The music didn't stop. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool window pane, trying to locate the direction. It wasn't coming from the road. It wasn't echoing from a neighboring house. It seemed to rise directly from the trees themselves, not above them, not beyond them, from within. That's when I noticed something else. The sound didn't move. Most distant noises shift slightly. Volume changes, angles blur. This melody stayed exactly where it was, as if anchored to a single point deep in the woods, a fixed place. I told myself it was probably someone hiking late with a speaker, or maybe sound traveling oddly through the trees. Forests do strange things to noise, I'd read that once. Still, I closed the window. The glass muted the world, but the melody lingered faintly, like a memory you can't shake. That night, sleep came in fragments. Every time I drifted off, the melody followed, not louder, not clearer, just present, winding itself into dreams that felt unfinished. In one, I was walking through the woods at dusk, following the sound. In another, I was standing still while the trees leaned closer, listening. I woke up just before dawn, heart calm but heavy, as if I'd been carrying something fragile all night. The woods looked harmless in the morning. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, painting everything in warm golds and greens. Birds chirped like nothing unusual had ever happened. No music. I almost laughed at myself. But when I stepped outside to check the mailbox, I noticed something that made me stop. My footprints from the night before. They were faint, barely visible in the dirt near the porch, and they pointed toward the woods. Not far, just a few steps. As if I'd gone out, stood there listening, and then turned back. I stood very still, listening to the forest breathe. And for just a moment, so brief I could have imagined it, I felt the unmistakable sense that whatever had been playing the music the night before had noticed me, too. The next evening, the music returned. Not all at once, never loudly, but in fragments, like it was being remembered rather than played. A single note drifted through the open window just after dusk, thin and uncertain, as if testing whether it was welcome. I froze where I stood. The house was quiet. The kettle had gone cold on the stove. Outside, the forest was already sinking into shadow, the trees blending into one another until depth disappeared. The sound did not come from any clear direction. It wasn't left or right, near or far. It simply was. I closed the window. The note faded, but not completely. It lingered, softer now, like a thought I was trying not to think. That night, I didn't dream, or if I did, the dreams left no memory, only a strange feeling in my chest when I woke, as if I'd been listening to something for a very long time. The following morning, I decided to walk toward the woods. I told myself I needed air. I told myself curiosity was better than fear. Mostly, I told myself that if the music was real, truly real, then daylight would strip it of whatever power it had. The path behind my house had always been simple, a narrow dirt trail that skirted the tree line, used mostly by deer and the occasional hiker who didn't mind getting lost for an hour or two. I'd walked it dozens of times. But that morning, the trail felt different. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. The trees leaned closer than I remembered, their branches tangled overhead, mooting the sky into pale ribbons of light. The air smelled damp, old, like leaves that had been turning into soil for centuries. I walked slowly, listening. No music. Only the soft crunch of my boots, the distant call of a bird I couldn't name, my own breathing. After 10 minutes, I started to relax. I even laughed at myself, quietly, feeling foolish. That's when I noticed the path ahead splitting in two. It hadn't been there before. One trail continued as I knew it, worn, narrow, curving gently back toward the clearing. The other veered sharply to the right, cutting deeper into the woods. Its soil looked darker, less disturbed, as if it hadn't been walked in a very long time. I stood between them, unsure why my heart had started to race. Then, faintly, impossibly, I heard the music again. It came from the darker path, not loud, not beckoning, just present, woven into the air itself. The melody was clearer now, almost whole, though I still couldn't have hummed it if I tried. It felt less like a sound and more like a memory pressing gently against the back of my mind. I took one step toward it. The forest seemed to breathe in. I stopped. A thought surfaced, sudden and sharp. If I walk down that path, I won't come back the same. I don't know how I knew that. I just did. So I turned away. The moment I stepped back onto the familiar trail, the music softened, stretched thin, and then dissolved entirely. The woods returned to their ordinary silence, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. When I reached my house, I checked my watch. I'd been gone for nearly 2 hours. It felt like 20 minutes. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something that made sleep impossible. The melody, the one I couldn't remember, was still with me. Not in my ears, but somewhere deeper. And for the first time, I wondered whether the music wasn't coming from the woods at all, but whether the woods were simply reminding me of something I'd once known and somehow forgotten. The next night, the woods were quieter than before. Not silent, never silent, but quieter in a way that felt deliberate, as if the forest were holding its breath. I stood at the edge of the tree line, flashlight in one hand, recorder in the other, listening for the music that had followed me home for days. Nothing. Only wind slipping through needles, only the distant croak of frogs near the creek. I should have felt relieved. Instead, my chest tightened. When the music returned, it did so softly, barely more than a suggestion, a single note, thin as thread, drifting from somewhere deep among the trees. I stepped forward. The dirt path I'd walked my entire life seemed wrong. The ground dipped where it never had before, and the trees leaned inward, their trunks bending just enough to narrow my view ahead. My flashlight game felt weaker here, swallowed by bark and shadow.
The music pulsed again. This time, it wasn't coming from one direction. It moved, circling, drifting, never settling. I realized then that it wasn't guiding me forward. It was inviting me to listen. I stopped walking and closed my eyes. That was my mistake. When I opened them again, the path behind me was gone. Not blocked, not hidden, gone, as if it had never existed. In its place stood a wall of trees, roots tangled together like clenched fingers. My heart kicked hard, but the panic never fully arrived. Instead, a strange calm spread through me, heavy and slow. The music softened. I followed it deeper into the woods.
The trees grew taller, their branches weaving together overhead until the sky disappeared entirely. The air felt warmer here, thicker, carrying the scent of old leaves and rain-soaked earth. Then I saw it, a small clearing, perfectly round, untouched by undergrowth. In the center stood something that didn't belong, a wooden chair. It was old but well kept, its legs pressed firmly into the soil as if it had always been there. And resting on the seat was a violin. No case, no bow, just the instrument humming to itself. The music stopped the moment I stepped into the clearing. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was expectant. Then, very gently, the violin string moved on its own. And somewhere behind me, the forest shifted, as if it had taken one careful step closer. The path narrowed until it was no longer a path at all, just a suggestion pressed into the earth, like the forest itself had once considered letting people through and then changed its mind. The music grew clearer here, not louder, clearer. Each note felt intentional now, as if whoever or whatever was playing knew I was listening. I stopped walking. The trees ahead opened into a clearing that didn't belong. The grass was too even, the air too still. Moonlight pooled at the center like a spotlight on a stage, and at the very heart of it stood something that made my chest tighten with a feeling I didn't have a name for. A small wooden platform. Not old, not new, just maintained. On it sat a single chair, empty. The music was coming from behind it. I took one step closer, and the sound shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The melody adjusted itself, like a musician correcting tempo when someone enters the room. That's when I noticed the marks. The trees around the clearing were scarred with shallow carvings, symbols, initials, half-finished names. Some were so old the bark had grown over them, others fresh enough that the wood beneath still looked pale. People had been here, many people, and none of them had finished what they started writing. My phone vibrated in my pocket, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. No signal, no notifications, just one new voice memo, time-stamped tonight. I didn't remember recording anything. With shaking fingers, I pressed play. At first, there was only breathing. My breathing. Then a whisper. Quiet, careful, and unmistakably my own voice. If you're hearing this, don't sit down. The chair creaked, not because I touched it, because it moved, just slightly. As if someone unseen had adjusted it, waiting. The music softened then, losing its edges, becoming gentle, inviting, almost comforting, the kind of tune that made you want to rest your feet, close your eyes, and forget how tired you were. I understood then. This wasn't a trap. It was an invitation, and the forest wasn't chasing people away. It was listening to see who would stay. I backed away from the clearing, heart pounding, eyes never leaving the chair. The music followed me, not in sound, but in memory, looping softly in my thoughts. When I finally turned and ran, the forest didn't stop me. It let me go, which was worse. Because as I burst back onto the dirt road, gasping and shaking, one terrible certainty settled in my chest. The music knew my name now, and it knew how close I'd come to sitting down. By the sixth night, the music no longer waited for darkness. It came in the late afternoon, when the sun was still pale in the sky, when the woods looked almost ordinary, just trees, shadows, and old leaves pressed flat by time. That frightened me more than when it came at night. Darkness, at least, had excuses. I was washing a mug in the sink when the sound drifted through the open window. Soft, familiar. 3 notes. I froze, my hands still submerged in lukewarm water. The melody wasn't louder than before, but it was clearer, less distant, as if the woods had taken a careful step closer while I wasn't watching. I turned off the tap. Silence filled the kitchen, heavy and expectant. Then there it was again. 3 notes, a pause, 2 more. My chest tightened. The tune felt deliberate now, like it wasn't just existing, but waiting. I dried my hands slowly, as if sudden movement might break something fragile. When I stepped outside, the air smelled of pine and damp earth. Birds had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The path into the woods stood open. I hadn't planned to go in. I told myself that as I walked. I was only going to stand at the edge, only to listen. But the melody shifted. Not louder, inviting. Each note landed like a gentle hand on my back, guiding rather than pushing. I found myself following the narrow trail, leaves crunching softly under my shoes. The deeper I went, the more the woods changed. Trees leaned closer together, their branches weaving a canopy that dimmed the light. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint metallic tang, like old rain or distant thunder. And the music, it began to move. It wasn't coming from one place anymore. It drifted from left to right, ahead and behind, surrounding me without echoing. No instrument I knew could behave like that. Then I saw it. A clearing, perfectly round, too perfect. The trees around it bent inward as though they had grown this way on purpose, guarding what lay at the center. Moss covered the ground in thick, velvety layers, untouched by footprints. In the middle stood something that did not belong. A wooden structure, low, circular, half sunken into the earth. It looked like a small stage, or perhaps a well without water. Carved symbols ran along its rim, worn smooth by time and hands. And resting on it, an instrument. I don't know how else to describe it. It resembled a violin, but larger, darker. Its surface looked aged beyond centuries, the wood almost breathing. The strings shimmered faintly, though no wind touched them. The music stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. I took a step closer. That's when I noticed the marks on the ground around the structure. Footprints, Old ones, new ones, some barefoot, some too narrow, some too long, all facing inward. My heart began to pound, but beneath the fear was something else. Recognition. I had been here before. Not in body, in memory. The melody returned, but softer now, slower. It no longer drifted. It rose directly from the instrument, though no bow touched the strings. And in that moment, I understood something that made my breath catch. The music was not calling everyone. It was calling me. Because I was not just listening anymore. I was remembering. And somewhere deep in the woods, something stirred, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to finally be noticed. The path narrowed until it was barely a suggestion in the grass. The trees here grew farther apart, as if they were hesitant to stand too close to whatever lay ahead. Their branches no longer tangled overhead. Instead, the sky opened in pale fragments, clouds stretched thin, light dulled as though filtered through old glass. And the music, it was changing. It no longer drifted. Now it waited. I felt it before I fully understood it, a gentle pressure behind my eyes, a slow vibration in my chest. The melody had lost its wandering quality. It repeated itself, the same few notes circling endlessly, like a thought you can't let go of no matter how hard you try. I stepped into a clearing. The grass here was shorter, pressed flat in wide arcs, as though many feet had stood here over a very long time. In the center was nothing remarkable at first glance. No altar, no structure, no visible source of sound. Just space. And yet, the music was strongest here. It wrapped around me, no longer distant or ambient. It felt personal now, tuned precisely to something inside me. Each note landed softly, like a question asked without words. I stood very still. That's when I noticed the silence between the notes. There was something wrong with it. The pauses weren't empty. They felt occupied, as though something else was breathing there, just beneath the melody. I realized then that the music wasn't coming from the woods. It was being held by them. I knelt, pressing my palm to the ground. The earth was warm. Not sun-warmed. This was deeper, steadier. A warmth that pulsed faintly in time with the song. My throat tightened. A memory surfaced without permission. Childhood evenings, lying in bed, listening to distant radios through open windows. The comfort of knowing someone else was awake somewhere, living their life alongside mine. Loneliness disguised as peace. The music swelled gently, and with it came a feeling I hadn't expected. Relief, not joy, not fear. Relief, like being forgiven for something you never realized you were carrying. I understood then why people followed it, why they stayed. The woods weren't luring anyone with danger. They were offering rest, a place where longing could dissolve into sound, where questions didn't need answers. I looked around the clearing again. That's when I saw them. Not faces, not bodies, impressions. shallow depressions in the grass shaped like people who had stood very still for a long time. Some were close together, some stood alone. All of them faced the center, as if listening, as if belonging. The music softened, almost invitingly. I felt the pull, not a force, not a command, just a gentle suggestion that I could stop here, that I didn't have to carry the noise of my own thoughts back with me, that I could become part of the pause between notes. My breathing slowed. For a moment, just a moment, I considered it. Then the melody shifted. One wrong note. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it didn't belong. It trembled slightly off key, like a voice cracking mid-sentence. And in that tiny fracture, I felt something else beneath the calm. Hunger. Not for bodies, for attention. The woods didn't want people to disappear. They wanted people to listen forever. I stood up. The music did not stop, but it changed again, less comforting now, more insistent, as if confused by my refusal. The warmth beneath my feet faded slightly. The clearing seemed disappointed. I took one step back, then another. With each step away, the melody loosened its grip, becoming distant once more. The wrong note lingered, echoing faintly like a warning. As I turned toward the path, I realized something that made my chest ache. The music would always be there, not calling loudly, just waiting, patient, gentle, endlessly calm. And one day when the world felt too heavy, it would sound exactly like what someone needed. I walked away before it could learn my name. The path narrowed as I walked deeper into the forest, the trees pressing closer together like silent witnesses. Their branches arched overhead, knitting a dark cathedral of leaves and shadow. The music was clearer now, not louder, but closer. It seemed to rise from the ground itself, as if the soil remembered something ancient and was humming it back into the night. Each step felt heavier, not with fear, but with recognition. A strange familiarity settled in my chest, the way a half-forgotten dream feels real the moment you remember it. The melody slowed. It adjusted to my breathing. I stopped walking. The music did not stop with me. Instead, it softened, like it was waiting. That was when I noticed the clearing. It wasn't large, just a small open space where the trees stepped back respectfully. Moonlight spilled down in a pale circle, illuminating moss-covered stones arranged in no clear pattern. In the center stood an old wooden post, weathered smooth by time. Carved into it were shallow grooves, worn almost flat, like fingers had traced them again and again over centuries. The music came from there, not from an instrument, from the space itself. I stepped into the clearing, and the air changed. It felt warmer, heavier, like a held breath finally released. My ears rang softly, then settled into the rhythm of the melody. Images surfaced in my mind without warning. A child standing at the edge of these woods, listening. A village long gone, lights flickering where trees now stood. People gathering, not in fear, but in quiet understanding. The music wasn't calling people to disappear, it was calling them to remember. I touched the wooden post. The melody faltered just for a moment, as if surprised. Then it changed. A new layer joined, lower, slower, filled with longing. My throat tightened. I didn't know why, but tears welled in my eyes. The sound carried emotions without words, grief without pain, nostalgia without regret. I understood then.
The woods were not alive in the way stories warned about. They were listening, holding echoes of everyone who had ever stood here and felt too much, thought too deeply, or needed somewhere quiet to place their thoughts. The music was made of all of that, and somehow it recognized me. "Why me?" I whispered, my voice barely existing beside the melody. The answer didn't come in words, it came as a feeling. Because you listened. The melody began to slow, stretching its final notes like fingers loosening their grip. The clearing dimmed, moonlight fading as clouds drifted overhead. The warmth receded. I stepped back instinctively.
The music didn't follow. Instead, it gently retreated, sinking back into the woods, into the soil, into memory itself. The silence that replaced it wasn't empty, it was full, like a room after a meaningful conversation. When I turned around, the path behind me was visible again, clear and familiar. I walked home without looking back. That night, as I lay in bed, the forest was silent. No hum, no distant melody, just the ordinary sounds of wind and faraway traffic. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt honored, because now I knew the truth. The music from the woods doesn't play all the time. It waits. And someday, when someone is quiet enough to hear it, it will play again.
The music did not stop. It softened. That was the first thing I noticed as dawn crept into the edges of the forest. The sky turned pale gray, then slowly blue, like a held breath finally released. Birds began to stir. Leaves shifted. The world remembered how to be ordinary again. And yet, the melody was still there. Not loud, not distant, just present. I stood at the edge of the woods, exactly where I had first heard it nights ago. My shoes were damp with dew. My phone buzzed with missed calls I didn't remember ignoring. Time had passed in a way that felt uneven, like I had slept without dreaming while awake.
The trees looked harmless now. Tall, old, quiet. No glowing shapes, no movement between trunks, no unseen listeners. And yet I knew that if I stepped just a little farther inside, the forest would answer me again. The melody shifted, barely noticeable, like it was acknowledging my awareness, not inviting, not warning, simply remembering me. I thought about the note in my pocket, the one that now felt warm, as if it had absorbed the night itself. When I unfolded it, the ink was fading,
letters thinning into suggestion rather than command. You heard us. That was all that remained. I didn't feel afraid.
That surprised me most. Fear would have been easier, something sharp and clean. But what filled me instead was a gentle weight, like nostalgia for something I could never fully name, like the sadness of leaving a place that was never meant to be home, but somehow still mattered. I realized then that the forest didn't take people. It kept moments, sounds, feelings, memories too quiet to survive in daylight. And once in a while, it shared them with someone willing to listen. I took a step back. The music dimmed. Another step, softer still. By the time I reached the road, it was almost gone. No more than a hum beneath the wind, easy to mistake for imagination. Cars passed, life resumed its pace, the spell loosened its grip. But it never fully released me. Even now, nights later, I catch myself pausing when everything goes quiet, when the world settles into that deep, honest stillness just before sleep. Sometimes in that space between breaths, I hear it again. Not calling, not following, just reminding me that some mysteries don't want to be solved, only heard, and that silence, once broken by the right sound, is never quite the same again. If you ever find yourself near a forest at night, and you hear music where there shouldn't be any, don't run, just listen, and decide how much of yourself you're willing to leave behind.